I'd like to introduce a very small institution for this, to end this session on the institutions. It's a small gallery that had just 2 rooms, and the talk will be sort of a preface to your talk. We'll see many slides we've seen in the last 2 days, again, maybe in a different context. So let me introduce you to Dorothy Warren, the eccentric owner of the Warren Gallery in London, and of a cockatoo, which made it into her wedding picture, published in 1928 by the London Society magazine, The Sketch. She's introduced here as the bride, who is well known in art circles. She's the owner of the Warren Art Galleries, and the reception after the ceremony was held there. And the cockatoo is mentioned as a prominent guest at the party. A printed invitation to this wedding has found its way into the archives of the Courtauld Museum in Berlin. Without wanting to stress the historic importance of this incident too much, I do like to see it as a small proof of a cross-national friendship between the English gallerist and the German artist that might illuminate how cultural exchange between the 2 countries was influenced by personal relationships. I doubt it that Georg Kolbe, 20 years her senior, made it to London for the certainly fabulous party at her premises, but although he must have known Warren quite well, he had produced a portrait of her 2 years earlier, in 1926, which is also in the collection of the Kolbe Museum in Berlin, and she had returned the favor with an exhibition of his sculptures at her gallery in London earlier in 1928. My attempt to put Dorothy Warren back on the map of the British-German art scene may serve as a case study, which illustrates the role played by gallerists and artists traveling back and forth between the 2 countries in the interwar years and carrying with them ideas and objects in both directions. So I'm interested more in the journeys than in the mapping of London, which we've seen before, which I think is also very interesting. How did I become interested in Dorothy Warren? I don't consider myself a specialist in either British or German art, maybe more so in German art, and the art market is not really on my radar. I usually work on photography with a special focus on the German sculptor turned photographer Karl Blosfeld, as well as on photo books and contemporary photography. So this is also a spin-off project of mine. So why Warren? She crossed my path as the first gallerist to show Blosfeld's plant photographs in England in 1929. The show seemed interesting and highly unusual to me, and I restaged it in an exhibition I curated for the Contemporary Art Center in Cincinnati, which is still running through January 13th. It is called, that's the book that was mentioned, No Two Alike, Karl Blosfeld, Francis Bruguière, Thomas Ruff, and I will do a little promotion. I don't think you're going to make it to Cincinnati in the next few months, so I will show you a few pictures from that show. It juxtaposes Ruff's negative series, which are Blosfeld, some of which are Blosfeld motifs, and his large format abstract photograms with my reinterpretation of the historic exhibition of Dorothy Warren's, where she combined Blosfeld's plant photographs, now you see a little view into this historic exhibition. She combined plant photographs by Blosfeld, which you see here. You probably all know them, with abstract light designs, paper cut abstractions by the American photographer then living in London, Francis Bruguière, at her gallery in London in November of 1929. We've already heard about Bruguière also. Some more use of the exhibition. It's the largest Bruguière show since 1978 and the largest Blosfeld show in America ever. The exhibition actually celebrated a double book launch for Blosfeld's Art Forms in Nature, which came out with Twemmer in 1929. It was the English translation of the extremely successful book of plant photographs, Urformen der Kunst, which was published in Berlin the year before. And Bruguière's Beyond This Point, written in what they call absolute collaboration with the BBC author Lance Sieveking. It's a very exceptional book. I don't have time to talk about it, but if you ever get it in your hands, please do look at At her gallery, Dorothy Warren showed 35 gelatin silver prints of light designs in multiple exposures by Bruguière, including some film stills he had produced with the German dancer Sebastian Droste in the mid-1920s in New York, and skipped those because I think they don't make much sense there. She showed those in one of her rooms, and a gramophone record was playing in his room with Stephen King reading from his book, which is a pretty special occasion, I think, in the history of museography, to have sound and image at the same time, 1929. I didn't find this gramophone record, unfortunately, but we're still showing Bruguière's film, which has piano variations going with it, so we also have that element of sound in the exhibition. And in the other room that she had, she showed 102 photographs from the book, from Bosfeld's book, and from an unbound portfolio version of his publication, so she didn't really show vintage prints. I do function as to show vintage prints. So, a surprising pair. Bosfeld and Bruguière are two examples, and their Warren Gallery exhibition intrigued critics at the time as being quite different from the usual run of photographic shows. With today's hindsight, the show becomes even more remarkable. To art historians, the juxtaposition of vegetal forms and geometric abstractions, which in this exhibition recalls, of course, Warringer's abstraction and empathy, which experienced such an important reception in England at this period. We've heard about it before. And it illustrates central concerns of British modern art, especially of sculpture and of biomorphism in general. However, Dorothy Warren and her short-lived gallery, which she ran from 1927 to 1934, have not received the same attention in art history writing as, for example, the Leicester Galleries or the art dealer Freddie Mayer, who was a regular customer of Dorothy Warren and represented some of the same artists. Warren was born in 1896 into a family interested in the arts. Her aunt was the Bloomsbury patron Lady Ottoline Morel, her godfather the writer Henry James. In a scarce literature, Warren's name appears in connection with the public scandal of the D.H. Lawrence exhibition she hosted in 1929. You can see D.H. Lawrence's portrait on the wall there, a photographic portrait. He actually, not everybody knows this, but he also painted, and it created a huge scandal. The show was, part of the show was confiscated. The paintings were actually put into jail, locked up in jail. There was a big scandal, but before they were all locked up, Dorothy Warren had 12,000 visitors in her gallery who were all eager to see the pornographic part of that exhibition. So she was quite known for that at the time. Her name also pops up in connection with the sculptures of Gertrude Hermes. You can see Hermes's moth sculpture on the left on the mantelpiece there. And in connection with the needlework by the fisherman John Kraske, both of which she showed at the gallery. It also pops up with the personal scandal she caused by having an affair with Sylvia Townsend, Warner's lover, the poet Valentine Acklin, which involved drugs and violent disputes, with Warren threatening to knock Acklin's face in with a kettle. And last but not least, she's mentioned as the gallerist who offered Henry Moore his very first solo show in 1928. Stephen King, the BBC author who wrote Bruguière's book, described Warren in his autobiography as a, quote, remarkable woman, tall and commanding. Sylvia Townsend Warner's biased impression was, quote, beautiful beechen hair, a fierce, taut, slender shape, but ugly hands and a voice like Ottoline's, only more baying. Henry Moore remembered her as a significant advocate of British modernism with, quote, tremendous energy and real verve, real flair. And D.H. Lawrence described her as awfully nervy and complained of her unreliability in business matters. Nevertheless, he entrusted her with the exhibition of his highly controversial paintings and could count on her unconditional support during the police raid and the subsequent trial. After closing her galleries in the mid-30s, Warren returned to interior decoration, and she died in Edinburgh quite young in 1954. In a good moment, D.H. Lawrence, quoting his stepdaughter, the painter Barbara Wheatley, herself an artist of the gallery, called the Warren Gallery the smartest private art gallery place in London. The gallery was located at the corner of Maddox Street and George Street in Mayfair and consisted of 2 rooms on the first floor of an 18th century building. Warren's flat was above it. On the top floor of that old house lived another eccentric, Edward Gawthorne Hardy, a member of the notorious Brad Young Things. So you can imagine what the people were like who were actually going in and out of this building. The gallery was intimate and decorated like a private apartment, very unlike London's prestigious Google Gallery, for example, or the galleries Bernheim Schoen or Paul Rosenberg in Paris, which Malcolm G. describes as a, quote, a cross between a museum and an aristocratic residency. It also did not have the elegant modern look you would find at the Neardorf Gallery in Berlin, where Lossow had his first solo show, and the furniture was designed by Bauhaus designer Marcel Breuer. But Warren was proud of her grey velvet-covered walls in one room. This is the velvet room, and you can see Henry Moore's head of a girl and his bird on the mantelpiece. And they were there because there's a gallery of notebooks which lists what was happening, who was coming and going in the gallery. Unfortunately, not entirely reliable and not, of course, not exhaustive. But Henry Moore still had a lot of works at the gallery, which he picked up in January 1930, so in November 1929. And there must have been a lot of Henry Moore in the gallery while also the Berger were shown, which is exact. And she was also proud of her concealed lighting that she had installed. You can see it a little bit on the left corner here. This is in her second room, which was the large room where Lossow was shown. Her aim was, quote, to create in a house of a congenial period a perfect dwelling, aesthetically and practically, end of quote, as her husband described it, corresponded with the new galleries that Andrew Stevenson, who's here with us today, very excited, nice to have you. He studied it in his essay on the London art galleries of the interwar years, which unfortunately don't mention the Warren Gallery. But according to him, they attracted, quote, new, younger, middle-class art audiences in England with a modern and metropolitan self-consciousness about presentation and provided for different forms of engagement with 20th century interior design and styling. So it's not just about the art, it's also about the styling. In Warren's gallery, everything was for sale, including the furniture, and she advertised framing services as a specialty. Reading through the Warren Gallery notebook, one learns that she was selling her art mostly to other dealers or artists, and the bestsellers with spontaneous visitors, mostly women, were her husband's Styrian jade objects, usually bought in order to serve as wedding presents. You can see them on the furniture on display. Dorothy Warren had a special affinity to Germany. She once called it admiringly, quote, a country carefully educated to approach all kinds of writing, drama, music, and all the other arts, without mentioning the sciences, from a superhumanly unprejudiced and objective standpoint. End of quote. She repeatedly traveled to Germany and must have established a network of artists and gallerists during these visits. She also ran a book department. She calls it a book department. I think it's probably that shelf in the back. In cooperation with a friend, Prince Leopold Löwenstein, who, according to Warren, was publishing German books in English and buying English books for translation and publication in Germany. This Leopold Löwenstein, by the way, is the father of Rupert Löwenstein, who was the financial manager of the Rolling Stones, known as Rupie the Rupie. Warren did business with German officials in London, mostly members of the embassy, and corresponded with Fritz Sachsen of the Warburg Library in Hamburg. When Frieda Ries, one of the most successful Berlin Society photographers, visited London, she photographed Bloomsbury hostess Mary Hutchinson, the Sitwells, Augustus John, and Dorothy Warren. The portraits were published as A German Photographer Looks at London in the society magazine The Tapper. It is very likely that Rees was a Berlin acquaintance of Warren's who introduced her to the other sitters. They all belonged to Warren's immediate circle of friends. Warren's exhibition program, though specialized in modern British art, and she was always, although knowing that coming out of the Bloomsbury group, she did show a little French art in the beginning, but then she made it the point that she wasn't showing French, she was showing British, and so she wasn't fried, she was rather Herbert Reed's sort of if we're doing this comparison again. Though she had all these British artists, she also included several German names. Blossfeld and Georg Kolbe being the most prominent today. In England, Blossfeld was perceived as a typically German artist. One reviewer of the BBC magazine, The Listener, wrote on art forms in nature, quote, "It is needless to point out that this book hails from Germany. No other national genius seems so well able to produce these monuments of combined patience and originality." End of quote. Bruguière's Americanness, on the other hand, was never mentioned. On the contrary, it was Bruguière's reputation in Germany which was noted in England. His photographs have been published in Uhu in 1925 already and exhibited at the Sturm Gallery in Berlin in 1928. A light design appears on the cover of the Sturm magazine in July 1928. According to the manager of the London Avenue Pavilion Cinema, which screened Bruguière's film Light Rhythms in March 1930, which was the first abstract film to be produced in England, Bruguière's photographs had received highest political attention in Germany. Quote, "Mr. Francis Bruguière is a very celebrated photographer who recently held an exhibition in the Warren Galleries in London and whose photographs were used in the German Reichstag to prove that photography had gained the status of an art." End quote. I wish I knew more about this, but haven't looked into it. The Georg Kolbe exhibition took place in June and July 1928 and consisted of 25 statues and 25 drawings dating from the early to the mid-1920s. Warren printed an illustrated invitation to her private view, and some of the sculptures in the small catalogue that was published, I was able to trace down. Here's the, it's a fold, you can open it up. Here's the front and the back side of this folding leaflet, and you can see that she is advertising, obviously, Georg Kolbe, but on the back she says permanently on view, also the French Impressionists, that's her Bloomsbury side, and then also Augusta Strong-Smith, Grant, and Paul Nash, etc., etc. And among the younger ones, then we have Henry Moore and Dame Walters. Framing is her specialty, and you can buy all this, the decoration and art books. And this is what the illustrations on the inside of the leaflet. Now, I traced down some of the sculptures that were in this exhibition. Georg Kolbe's Night, which is the painting to the Morning, which was shown in the Barcelona Pavilion in 1939 also. Is that here? No, can't. Oh, right, okay. It's 1926, but shown in 1929. Then these two sculptures were shown, Assunta and the Dance of Death. And I think this is, I'm just going through this because we don't have time to do a big art historical analysis, but it's quite important to think that Henry Moore and other sculptors at the time who were frequenting the gallery, and Paul Nash, were probably seeing this German sculptor here, probably for the first time, I would say. Paolo and Francesco was in the exhibition. These were all mostly small-scale sculptures measuring only just a few inches in height, so they were really made to put on the table. Then there were also portraits and drawings, mostly blue and sepia ink washes, consisting mainly of nudes. And since Sam Courtauld was collecting in those years, I had hoped to find some in the collection. It would have been so nice to show that he had been a customer of the Warren Gallery, but all I could find were etchings of the same period, which Warren might have sold without listing them in the catalogs. But he could have bought them through flat time too, I could imagine. Maybe someone here would know more about this. Warren also devoted a solo exhibition to the Düsseldorf sculptor Karl Moritz Schreiner. In October of 1930, the Schreiner exhibition included 37 sculptures, portraits, and animal figures in plaster or stucco, as well as 24 drawings. It did not do well, although the press, without mentioning that Schreiner was a German artist, was favourable, especially to his cats and kittens, as well as his dying horse, subjects that I suppose seemed to please local customers. The gallery notebook, however, states for the opening, quote, good attendance but no sales. Before doing these monographic shows, Dorothy Warren had committed to a Berlin-London art exchange, Kunsttausch Berlin, London, and so what you're saying that there was no exhibition of British contemporary art since the First World War. It's not true, it's humbug. She actually did a gallery swap with Berlin gallerist whose name was Rudolf Wilczek in 1927. So it consisted of Wilczek's presentation of German artists in Warren's gallery and Warren's presentation of English artists at Wilczek's gallery. Wilczek's exhibition included works by artists Gerd Wollheim and Karl Gautermann the Elder. By Wollheim he showed, among other paintings, Death of a Beggar, which I'm showing here, which is as the most part of his paintings from the interwar years is now lost. Gautermann was apparently noted by the reviewer of the Times as one of the best watercolor artists comparable to William Turner, an outstanding compliment offered to a foreign artist. In the spring of 1928, just before her Kolbe exhibition in London, Warren showed her English painters at Wilczek's gallery in Berlin. The show included 60 works by Augustus John, Walter Sickert, Duncan Grant, Alan Walton, Paul Nash, Barbara Wheatley, and possibly others. It was pointed out by the press as a special event, since contemporary British art was hardly seen in Germany at the time. I'm going to translate this quickly. It says art exhibitions in Berlin. The Wilczek Gallery showed a collection of paintings by English artists. The exhibition had the charm of the uncommon. The English painters are behaving in a well-mannered way, an expression we've heard before. Of special interest were pictures by Walter Sickert, Duncan Grant, and above all, Paul Nash, the Downs, which they translated into idle down, and which would be the actual feathers. It was quite funny, because the Downs are obviously landscapes. And Alan Walton, Soldier Color. Among the drawings, the most interesting were the ones by Augustus John. End of this quote. That's all I could find about this exhibition, unfortunately. Philip Trotter, Warren's husband, later insisted on the importance of Warren's engagement. I quote from his memoir. Dorothy Warren's exhibitions of contemporary, he says it in plural, exhibitions of contemporary British art in Berlin and elsewhere, I don't know where, were a first pioneer step in a movement that is now part of the stock in trade of the British Council. This is written in 1957. Working on a Foreign Office grant and advised by high officials of the state machinery of aesthetics. We didn't like the British Council too much, I think. Continuing the quote. For a young woman with no capital, presenting her own selection of artists, some like Sickert already famous, but mostly known in London only through her efforts, they were a tour de force. Lord Daberman, we've seen before, as British ambassador at Berlin, opening the first of these exhibitions, paid tribute to their contribution to international understanding. We've seen him before. It was Max Sauerland, director of the Museum für Kunst und Gewerbe, and Hildebrand Courtauld, director of the Kunstverein, we've heard that before, who would promote English art a few years later, and who generally get the credit for introducing the British avant-garde to Germany. Yes, and here's his head there. More which is lost. Yeah. Gurlitt's new English art exhibition opened 4 years after Dorothy Warren's in June 1932 in Hamburg. We've just seen this. And we've also seen this drawing, which has made its way into Gurlitt's collection, which is now at the Kunstmuseum Bern. And there's quite a bit of publication on its attribution this year, I think. Gurlitt's articles on British painting and sculpture were published in October of the same year in Die Neue Stadt. Contrary to Warren's Berlin show, the Hamburg, sorry, I'm showing you more of this. This is, so you can see some of the paintings that were in the show in Hamburg by Barra, Hodgkins, Christopher Woods, Stanley Spencer, and William Roberts. I don't know if you can read it. Wadsworth and Nicholson, of course. And then there's also an article on sculpture with a special mention of Henry Moore. This is also by Gordon. So contrary to Warren's Berlin show, the Hamburg exhibition concentrated exclusively on the younger generation, which would makes it really the first avant-garde show, if you don't call Sigurd and Augustus John avant-garde in 1928. The literature on Henry Moore credits Sauerland and his personal friendship with Herbert Reed for the first acquisition of Moore's work in Germany. However, the painter Hubert Wellington, principal of the Edinburgh College of Art, in 1957 remembered what he called Dorothy Warren's, quote, crusade for Henry Moore in Germany, which, according to him, resulted, again, quote, in the purchase of 3 of Moore's works by the Hamburg Gallery before any official recognition had been given to him in England. How do we account for this discrepancy? Was it Reed, or was it Warren who negotiated the sale to Germany? Herbert Reed was friends with Moore, Nash, and Bruguière, whose multiple exposures of hammers, here, this is a Bruguière photograph on the left, is on the dust jacket of Reed's Art and Industry, not on the first. We've seen the first edition, I think this is the second edition, but it's also inside, it's also in the book, with other photographs by Bruguière. And Bruguière also photographed at least one of Henry Moore's sculptures, which was published in 1936 in Herbert Reed's book, Surrealism. So there are all these connections around, in this circle around Dorothy Warren with Herbert Reed and Bruguière and Moore and so on. It is, Reed was also, therefore, certainly also a regular visitor to the Warren Gallery. It is not unlikely that Reed directed Sauerland to Dorothy Warren. A Warren Gallery notebook entry of October 4th, 1928 mentions, quote, Art Gallery Hamburg sent man to see about holding a show. Will return. Whether the mysterious art gallery man from Hamburg ever returned is unfortunately not in the books and would require further research. We may conclude from this short introduction to Dorothy Warren's promotion of German art in England and of English art in Germany that she was instrumental in constructing a platform of comparison. For example, of Blossfeld with his clean and reduced biomorphic sculpture-looking platforms, or Georg Holbein in his rather conservative efforts in abstracting the human body with the latest trends in British art. And we could start an art historical discourse on questions of influence between German photography and sculpture, and say, between German photography and German sculpture, and say the young Henry Moore, who frequented the Warren Gallery regularly. Here you can see a Blossfeld photograph, which is reproduced in Wilensky's Meaning of Modern Sculpture of 1932. Wilensky wrote the introduction to the catalogue of the Hamburg exhibition that you said. He didn't actually place Blossfeld photographs next to contemporary sculptures, but he used it in comparison with primitive sculpture to construct this idea of a universality of form that you find in nature, and you find it all over the world, and you find it again in contemporary art. And he also, in his text, he invites the reader to compare Blossfeld's photographs with Bedford's sculptures. He doesn't do it actually visually, but he invites to do that. We could also ask ourselves why Dorothy, so that's one thing, is to do that sculpture thing. Or we could also ask ourselves why Dorothy Warren's name does not appear in much of the existing literature. We could analyze the London art market and see whether there were other small galleries that have disappeared from the record, or if Warren's case was unique and possibly due to the fact that she was a woman. Or we may end this session on the institutions that were promoting exchange between England and Germany by acknowledging the individuals, male or female, behind these institutions, even small ones, as the driving force of this exchange of objects and ideas. The questions, who attended which wedding, how did they meet, where did they travel, liked, envied, or hated whom, dangerously opened the doors to gossip and speculation. But after all, this is the stuff that human relations are made of, and the art world is in no exception, on the contrary. In his autobiography, Lance Sieveking, the author of Bruegger's book that was launched at the Warren Gallery, drew an arbor cognitionis, a tree of first encounters and acquaintances. It is intended, he writes below on the right, unfortunately the librarian put her stamp just right in the middle of the text. It is intended, he writes, to show how one's life is given a certain shape by the people one meets and the people through whom one meets them. The table represents quite an impressive and maybe not always entirely reliable, and in this case I think rather vain, who's who of British culture and politics of the period. You can find Lance Sieveking himself on the top left, on the top, very top are his parents. I think he was quite proud of his noble heritage through his mother. And Dorothy Warren is listed at the bottom left corner together with Francis Bruegger. On the right appears Sam Courtauld, the man responsible for our being here and forming a new international network or tree of acquaintances of art historians interested in the cultural exchange between England and Germany. Thank you.